All right, team, we're going to crack into it. I think we've got everyone we need here to get started. And so we're just going to welcome everyone here for the Strategy and Operations meeting for the 6th of May. I'll do my best, a little bit rusty having been away for a few weeks to get through. We've got a bit of a full agenda, and as you know, we've got another meeting later on today. So it'd be good if we can get through efficiently, still considering the business, but in an effective and efficient manner. So we're going to move through to the council blessing, item number 2, and Councillor Halliday is going to read the council blessing.
As we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just, so that with courage, vision and energy, we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. And as I'd mentioned at the previous S&O meeting, just want to remind people that the Chamber should be a safe place for anybody wishing to participate in the democratic process. And as Chair, I'm committed to creating that safe environment in which opinions can be respectfully expressed. In doing so, I won't tolerate any inappropriate behaviour to those in this Chamber. So with that, I move on to item number 3, which is apologies. And I think we had... I see Mr Mansell's here, so that's great. And I think Councillor Elliott might be leaving a little bit later on with some other commitments. So I'm not aware of any other apologies. Move on to item number 4, declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. None have been made aware to me, and I'm quick scan around the table. There is none. And so we're going to move on to item number 5, public speaking time. And I don't think there is any. So moving along nicely, we've got item number 6, members' business. There is no responses to public speaking time. Any leave of absence? 6B. No. Councillor Prefunding. Just wait till your microphone goes red, because that won't be captured by the sound system. So go with
22nd to 25th of May. Thank you.
So we've got that. Does someone want to move? Moved by Councillor Holborough, seconded by Councillor Hanford. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, and that is carried. Item 6C, matters of an urgent nature. None have been made aware to me as Chair. So we're going to move along to item number 7, which is the updates. We're going to do a little bit of a rejig of the agenda just before we move into that, and that's just moving the item on the LGFA forward, just to keep our visitor Andrew here from having to sit around too long. So that's item number 8.2. We'll move ahead of item number 8.1. But at the moment, we're just going to ask Andrew to speak to the presentation at item number 7.1 on the agenda. So welcome to the Kapiti Coast, Andrew. I'm going to hand it over to you. Andrew's just going to work through that, and then at the end we'll take some questions from elected members.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come and speak to councils. I've got a slide presentation, but I'll keep it sort of relatively short just to allow time for questions. In terms of LGFA, we're now up to 72 council members out of the 78 councils in New Zealand, and we've got another 4 in the process of joining. So it has been relatively successful in aggregating the sector together for its borrowing requirements. In terms of key developments, one of the most significant changes was the move by Standard & Poor's to upgrade the New Zealand government to AAA. And as a result, because LGFA is linked to the government, LGFA is also now AAA sort of rated. That's important because the highest rated bank in New Zealand is AA-, so that's 3 notches below LGFA. So it just gives LGFA a competitive advantage in terms of its financing costs, so we can raise money cheaper than what the banks can do and pass that on to the sector. It's also quite significant because there just aren't many AAA issuers left in the world. So Things like the United States, the UK, France, countries, Japan, none of those are AAA anymore. So in terms of overseas investors looking for high quality investments, again, it does make New Zealand and LGFA stand out.
You there. Sorry, team. I should have, and apologies to Andrew. I should have. Would have been helpful if I'd made you aware that the projector to my left, to your right, the bulb has gone on that, and we're waiting on another one. So at the moment, we've just got the one on the left-hand side of the chamber, and obviously the ones at the end there as well. So I'm just going to hand it back over to you, Andrew.
One of the other changes was the move by the government last year to increase LGFA standby facility. So it was $1 billion and the government increased it to $1.5 billion and also extended the term. It was due to mature this year, but they've extended that for a further 10 years with the right for LGFA to renew that. LGFA has never drawn down on that standby facility, but it's important that it's there because it signals to investors and the credit rating agencies that the government is standing behind the sector. Important last year through sort of COVID because there were periods where financial markets became quite dislocated and corporates couldn't issue bonds. So again, the government standing behind the sector was an important signal to investors. I'll come back to the sort of COVID thing right at the end. One thing we also did last year was just increase the net debt to revenue covenant. So it was 250%, and we've increased that up to 300% for the next few years, and it drops back to sort of 280%. The reason we can't increase it too much more, because if we increased it significantly, then the average credit quality of councils would decrease. So if Auckland, for example, were borrowing 350% net debt to revenue, their credit rating would drop, and then the average credit quality of LGFA's lending portfolio would drop, and therefore we'd end up with a lower sort of credit rating. So this was the most we sort of could push it for without sort of the rating agencies downgrading LGFA. But it was done to give councils more flexibility through COVID to allow them to co-invest with government if opportunities presented themselves for infrastructure investment. And also recognises that growth has been higher over recent years. So for growth councils, it does give them a bit more headroom in the longer term. The draft SOI, which is the item on the agenda, there's no changes to any of the primary objectives. So as you would imagine, the key objectives are to provide interest cost savings to councils, to provide longer term financing for councils. The secondary objectives, the only one that's changed is the last one, and we've added on to assist local government with significant matters. So COVID last year, and that's sort of reduced a little bit in its significance, but it could sort of flare up again. And the proposed sort of water reforms. So again, as the sector moves through water amalgamation, which appears sort of likely, then we will assist the sector where appropriate with transfers of debt, etc. In terms of the performance targets, these are the performance outcomes for the last 6 months. Profit was 5.9 million for the 6 months to December. So again, that's on target to achieve the annual profit forecast. The objectives that weren't met were the market share one, so that dropped below 85%, and that's simply because LGFA doesn't finance all of Auckland's debt because it's too big. If we did that, we'd end up being not diversified enough. So Auckland does about 2/3 of its financing in its own name. So when they come to the New Zealand market and do an issue, it does, when you get those one-off things, it dilutes market share. But if you took out Auckland, then LGFA's market share would be around 95% of the rest of the sector. The other thing we didn't meet was council visits. So we like to meet each council member at least once a year. But due to the disruption of COVID, we weren't able to do that in the last financial year. But we've been out sort of visiting councils in recent months, so we'll do that. We'll meet that objective this year. The reason just why we need to make a operating gain is just we need to keep building our capital base as the total amount of council lending sort of grows. So just as a bank has capital targets that it has to sort of maintain. So you can see that top left graph, the total amount of assets, which is largely lending to councils, keeps growing, and as a result we need to increasing our shareholder sort of base. So when LGFA started nearly 10 years ago, the capital was originally 25 million, and that's now been built up to 88 million through retained earnings. So that's the reason we need to keep generating a profit over time to keep building that up as lending to the sector keeps growing. Interest rates, just to show you what sort of happened over the last year. You can see in March last year there was a jump up in interest rates. Then they all fell quite significantly due to the global slowdown as a result of COVID. But in the first few months of this year, interest rates have started to sort of increase up again, just as a result of inflationary pressures, the fact that potentially the global economy will recover quicker than maybe thought. But that's still a little bit sort of fragile. But in any historical context, interest rates are still sort of incredibly low. So you can raise, well, councils can raise 10-year money at probably just over sort of 2%. So interest rates are low. They probably will rise a bit further, but again, increases in interest rates are likely to be modest by historical standards. And that's good when councils are looking to do longer term infrastructure. And the last one I'll touch on, just the covenant outcomes, because there was a lot of talk about the impact of COVID on the sector last year. So that just gives you the net debt to revenue outcome for the different sector groups. These are using the LGNZ definitions of rural, provincial, metro, etc. So you can see that net debt to revenue did rise modestly over the past sort of year, but relative to councils' forecasts in their 2018 LTP, they still came out sort of well below what councils were forecasting. So there certainly wasn't a significant deterioration in councils' financial position as a result of COVID. And over half councils still produced a balanced budget surplus last year. So again, that was better than what people were forecasting back in March and April last year. So I'll finish there, but happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Ian, can I just check if there's anything you want to add before we move into questions? Okay, thank you. Councillor Holborough.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. I have a couple of things I'd like to touch on. So you talked about the role of the local government funding agency during the transition period to the water reform and what that might look like post-reform. What do you see the role of LGFA being post-reform? Would the LGFA then be involved in funding water infrastructure through any entities that might be set up post-reform? I'm just thinking about the comments that have been happening about those entities needing to be of sufficient scale in order to fund their water infrastructure. Would that be alleviated by the LGFA's continuing involvement in funding through those new structures?
So LGFA's been in close discussions with DIA, and we also met with the Minister of Local Government a few weeks ago. To date, Department of Internal Affairs hasn't done a lot of work on the debt side of things. As it stands at the moment, LGFA is owned 80% by councils and 20% by government, and it's under its rules, it can only lend to councils and council-controlled organisations. The water entities, as they're proposed at the moment, would be a statutory entity. They wouldn't be a CCO, and therefore, unless shareholders changed LGFA's foundation policies, LGFA would not be able to lend to the water entities. And the new water entities and the transfer of debt won't threaten LGFA's financial viability. We're sort of around 13 billion of council lending now. We're expecting, because council debt will keep increasing, to grow at about $1 billion a year. So even if we lose $4 or $5 billion in 3 or 4 years' time, we'll probably only be back to where we are now, which is quite a nice size. But nothing's off the table. So, it's possible the government could provide government guarantees to the water entities, and then shareholders of LGFA might sort of say, we're happy for LGFA to lend to it. But ultimately, it's a matter for LGFA shareholders as to what they want LGFA to be and become. But at the moment, the most likely thing is we will continue just to focus solely on lending to councils. The other issue is water entities will not be as highly rated as councils. Water charges are not as good a security as rates, so their rating or their underlying rating will be more in the triple Bs. So we have to be careful not to dilute the credit quality of the overall lending book, because otherwise the cost of raising debt for councils would increase if LGFA's credit rating was lowered.
So following up from that, could our credit rating increase if we took water off the books then, if it's the less secure?
Yeah, so LGFA is already AAA rated, so we can't go any higher than that. But the credit quality of the council sector is really good. So again, it's probably a matter of not wanting it to be diluted by adding in lending to the water entities.
Thank you. So that leads quite nicely into my second question. So why does Auckland choose to stay predominantly outside the system through LGFA?
It's a rating agency requirement. So at the moment, LGFA's of its lending, about 25% is to Auckland Council. If it was significantly greater, Standard & Poor's would say LGFA's lending book is not diversified enough, it's too concentrated, and therefore they would say that represents a risk and we will lower the rating on LGFA. Auckland's debt at the moment is $10 billion, so it's more than half of the sector debt, and it's forecast to grow to $17 billion. So if we did all of LGFA's Auckland's lending, we'd probably have 60% of our portfolio to Auckland. And it's just like a bank, too much exposure to one thing creates the risk of something went wrong with that one thing.
Thank you very much. Excellent answers. Thank you.
His Worship the Mayor.
So technically, council is a shareholder in your organisation. So we have a CCO. Is that right? So we are shareholders.
True, yes.
Yes, you have
So
a
therefore,
CCO.
we have a CCO.
Yes, correct.
Because we have this general impression that we don't have one. Having said that, I want to explore your experience with CCOs right across the country's council-owned CCOs. How have they performed? What are the problems you've seen? What sort of advice can you give us, given that in our long-term plan we are now asking the public whether they would support council getting into that business, apart from the business we have done successfully with your organisation?
So, LGFA is not an advisor, so we don't tell councils what they should or shouldn't be doing, but we're happy to share our opinions and our observations.
That's what I'm asking.
Yep. Council CCTOs, so the trading side, are growing, and some councils growing relatively significantly. So Christchurch has the biggest one. And to give you an idea, to support their CCTO, they provide uncalled capital, so additional equity that could be put in if the CCTO requires. So the amount of that uncalled capital is currently 1.5 billion. So if they got into difficulty with their trading organisation, it's a significant risk to ratepayers, but it also, they've provided, significant earnings, so they're providing a good dividend stream. Entities like Bay of Plenty Regional Council have grown their CCTO significantly. What they're doing is quite really interesting, so that'd be a good one to talk to about the sort of things that they're sort of doing. A lot of the other regional councils like ECAN and things are looking at what Bay of Plenty is sort of doing and want to sort of move into that space. So the trading side of things is sort of growing. The actual CCO side is not growing, is relatively sort of stable. But potentially with the water reforms, there's some sort of talk that Canterbury could form their own CCO for water, in which case LGFA could potentially lend to that if it was a CCO.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, just picking up on an answer you gave Councillor Holborough about the potential funding for these new water entities if they come to be. One of the things we've been consistently told throughout the engagement we've had with Te Mata Arawa and Department of Internal Affairs is their view is that water rates are sort of a gold standard in terms of a revenue source for these new entities, and that they should get pretty high credit ratings. So I'm just wanting you to, I guess, expand a bit where you're saying that actually it's not quite the gold standard that we've been told it would be, and that these entities are potentially going to have a lower credit rating and presumably then higher funding costs.
Yeah. In terms of the charges, the background work I saw suggested that it will be a water charge, and there will be some transition because not only I think a third of the country has water meters, so there's going to be a period where councils will have to collect revenue on behalf of the water entities until water meters could be rolled out everywhere. In Scotland, for example, councils still collect all the residential water charges on behalf of Scottish Water, so that's 20 years later, so only commercial is metered. So there are different potential outcomes as how that could be done in New Zealand. In terms of the water charge, the person paying the water charge won't necessarily be the property owner, so it's quite, while anything legally is possible, trying to get the landlord to pay the water charge might be quite challenging because you can't control how much, unlike rates, you know what the charge is, you don't know how much water people are going to use.
So it sort of boils down to, I guess, that security over bad debts.
Yeah, and in most countries, it's just a water charge. It won't be a water charge secured by property like rates is. So it's a lesser security if you're looking at it as a lending sort of proposition. Again, the modelling I saw is that the water entities will have to write off a certain amount of the water charges each year from people that don't pay, so bad debts, just as power companies do. And there's nothing you can do to recover that other than you can reduce people's water flow. But I think legally, again, as you saw with the power companies, turning off the water altogether probably politically would be quite difficult. So in terms of the credit rating side, you can look at England that has a large number of privately owned water entities that have similar debt metrics in terms of net debt to total revenue as what is proposed in New Zealand. So in New Zealand, they're talking about, we've talked about councils being able to borrow 280% of net debt to revenue. For the water entities, they're talking, 600 to even possibly 1,000%, so 10 times. So and certainly it's significantly more than what councils are able to borrow. So again, if you did a straight comparison of those sort of debt metrics, you end up in the BBB to BB space. that will be mitigated somewhat by the fact that they'll be statutory entities rather than owned by privately, by private equity and things like that in the England. And it also be mitigated by the level of government support that they have. So the government might provide them with standby facilities. They might provide them with some financing. They might provide them with some equity. We'll just have to see on those sort of things. So they could be uplifted from triple B maybe into A minus, single A. DIA was sort of, their modelling said that they'd be single A, so we'll have to wait and see if that's correct or not. But still going to be ending up lower than where the council sector is, with a lower level of security if you're a lender. So that's a real issue if in terms of the debt transfer, because councils won't want to just transfer debt across to the water entities, because suddenly you'll be exposed to a lower entity. So there's going to need to be some form of government support probably on any transfer of loans.
Just got a response from Mark de Haast.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I just wanted to pick up on an earlier and completely understandable comment from the Mayor. We absolutely do have a CCO, and LGFA is our only CCO that we have at the moment. We are a shareholder. We have invested $100,000 in shares in the LGFA, and $100,000 of those shares are uncalled. We participate in the Shareholder Borrowers Day, we participate in the AGM. The paper that you would have read is fulfilling our obligations with the CCO. It's a monitoring function, there's a statement of intent, and we presented the half-year results. The fundamental difference is that we have very little influence on the day-to-day management of LGFA, and that's not a bad thing. LGFA has been set up slightly differently. There's the Shareholders Council, and the membership of that, we are represented. The Wellington City Council have a member on the Shareholders Council, and that member represents our interests in the Wellington region. So it's very different to a CCO, for example, at Hutt City Council. You've got Urban Plus Limited, you've got Seaview Marina, where you have the setup where Hutt City councillors are actually sitting on the board and actually influence the day-to-day management. So whilst it might not feel that we have a CCO, we absolutely do. Under legislation, we have to disclose the fact that we have CCOs on our long-term plan. We have to disclose that in our annual report as well. It's been a little while since we've had LGFA come and talk to you, but just for avoidance of doubt, this council has a CCO. It's called LGFA, and as you know, through the consultation document, what we're soliciting public feedback on is whether or not we should further explore other CCOs and attempt to look at other ways of generating revenue so that we aren't so reliant on rates. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was a really, really good point. I think it is very easy for us to forget that we do have a CCO, but we absolutely do, and it's called LGFA.
Thank you, Mark. I've got Councillor Randall next.
Yeah, thank you. I have to agree with Mark that the CCO, basically, the current one we have a little we, as elected members, have a little influence on the LGFA. So in CCOs in particular, when we create them, it becomes an entity of itself, and the rest of the governing board of councillors have no say other than those that are appointed to that. They become a separate organisation. And for CCTOs, don't we run into the problem as councillors and councils themselves? They're not equipped as like business people to generate the necessary profits.
Mr. de Haast.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's probably more appropriate that I actually answer that as opposed to Andrew. Andrew is just really here today to provide an oversight of what LGFA are doing. Look. In my view, I mean, we had an earlier presentation about CCOs and the different ways of setting up CCOs and CCTO. Look, my understanding is a CCO can't make a profit. A CCTO, which is a trading organisation, can make a profit. And there's different ways that you set that up. If you look across the country, if you look at CCOs, there are some CCOs that have councillors as board members. You have some CCOs where the councillors are not board members. In terms of the Local Government Act, elected members do influence a CCO by way of what legislation provides. There's a statement of intent, which is effectively whereby the council sets out, agrees, or asks the CCO to change what they plan to do over the next 3 years. With the LGFA, there was a letter of expectation, which was from the Shareholders Council to the board, and that letter of expectation was pretty much setting out what shareholders expect and want from LGFA. So there is varying levels of influence that councils can exert over a CCO. Generally, a CCTO is effectively run and operated like a commercial entity. And what you look for is you look for the board composition, you look for the right strengths and skill sets to manage that organisation. But in terms of, that's why we bring reports to you. We bring the statement of intent. We bring the half-year results. We bring to you the letter of expectations. So absolutely, a CCO is controlled and owned by councils by definition. So there absolutely is, but across the country there's different ways of setting it up. It really depends on what the CCO is setting out to do. And if councillors would like a further session on CCOs, we have done one in the past, and we can certainly do that again.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. I do apologise in advance if this question's already been answered. I had to duck out. As KCDC have announced declared a climate emergency, I would be very remiss to let this opportunity pass without giving you guys a wee nudge in a green direction. And the government has also launched a new initiative to combat climate change, where they require public sector agencies to measure and publicly report on your emissions and to offset any that you can't cut by 2025. I've looked all the way through your statement of intent and I can't really find any reference, and I'm sorry if there is a reference in there, but I'm wondering what your commitment is to honour the government's carbon neutrality goal by resolving not to use funds sourced by companies that are carbon emitting. You know, where is that there, and where is that in the objectives?
I think so. I think Andrew's got a response here.
Really good question and very topical, and something that we've been thinking about. So there's two parts. Is one about LGFA, and so it's our objective to be carbon neutral, and we're working with an organisation, I think it's Taitu or something. I think Kapiti actually is rated by them, and you were like the best in New Zealand or best council in New Zealand. So we're working with that same organisation. So actually we'd be interested in talking to you about what you're doing in that sort of space. So, but we're quite a simple organisation. We've only got 9 staff. Our only emissions are really flying, travel, and a little bit of electricity. So it's not like we're Fonterra. But we still want to get to sort of carbon neutral, and we're working on a plan to sort of do that and to reduce our emissions where possible. The second thing is to assist councils with green and sustainable lending. So we've employed someone, and this is to recognise that what investors are looking for on a global basis. So investors are looking, it's quite a wide-ranging area, but it's, you know, there's the ethical side of things, there's the climate change side of things, the sustainable side of things as well. So we're looking at introducing a framework whereby councils, when they borrow, can identify projects that meet certain criteria, and we'll pay for all that sort of criteria and the auditing of that. And it will just enable councils, when they do a project, and it might be a 5-star building, footpaths, cycleways, LED lighting, there's a large number that you can sort of borrow, and we'll give you a price discount. So even though we won't benefit because there's no price discount for us. We want to encourage councils to move down that sort of path. So we're going to roll out more information for councils over the next sort of few months. We have as Mark mentioned, we have our LGFA Borrower Day for all our council members in July, and we'll do sessions on all of this for the councils then. So it is really important to us, and we are putting more resourcing into that side of things.
Thank you. Supplementary question. So can we expect that perhaps after your next AGM that there will be a further bullet point on your objectives?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So we will raise that with the Shareholders Council, or you can. You could raise it through your representative. But no, that's very valid.
All right, thank you, Tim. I can't see any further questions around the table. Councillor Holborough.
Just one brief one, and this might be for where we've gone a bit off topic with the CCOs, but I'm just wondering why our representatives comes from Wellington City Council if they're representing the whole region rather than the regional council.
Oh, it's okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, a really good question. Look, it's really done by, I might get Andrew to help me. I think every 3 years the Shareholder Council changes by rotation. What typically happens is a lot of the participants actually put themselves up for sort of re-election in the Shareholders Council. There's 10, 11 or 12. Previously, the representative for the Wellington region was Mike Timmer, who was Greater Wellington Regional Council. Mike had been serving on the Shareholders Council since the establishment and actually was appointed to the board. So he came off and nominations were put up, and Wellington City put their hands up. We were quite comfortable being represented by Wellington City. Obviously. They've got a bigger debt book than us. They've been quite involved. So there's no reason as to why we wouldn't put our hands up. In fact, I met with Ian and I met with Andrew and the Chief Executive yesterday about the fact that this council might put up our hands to represent the Wellington region on the Shareholders Council in a year's time. There is a time commitment. The Shareholders Council is expected to represent its members. They do interact quite extensively with the board, and so we've just got to think really carefully about, can we be actively involved, because there is quite a lot of amount of work that goes into being part of the Shareholders Council, but certainly we started having those conversations yesterday.
So there's 10 councils on the Shareholders Council, and in simple terms they just divide up the list of the remaining councils. They might have 7 councils they represent each. So I assume you've just been put under Wellington because that's the way it's been divided up.
All right, thanks, team. Andrew and Ian, we've just had a little bit of a chat at the start around rejigging the agenda a little bit further and actually considering the paper. It just seems more appropriate while Andrew's still here, and we've just communicated that to our guests from the PopUp Business School as well. So we're going to skip item 7.2 and come back to that, and we're going to move to item 8.2 on the agenda, found on page 13. And Ian, if I can hand it back to you to just introduce that report and talk you through. Andrew, you're welcome to stay.
Happy to stay.
Yep. And so just over to you, Ian. So team, we're just on page 13.
Yeah, morning everybody. So just a quick overview of the papers you've got there, and this will overlap a little bit with some of the conversation we've just had and with Andrew's presentation, but LGFA is a CCO and we are a shareholder. We're obviously a small shareholder. I think it's under 1%, but we are a shareholder, and with that, therefore, we're required to undertake regular performance monitoring, and that's the reason that these papers are with you. So we cover off here the most recent half-year report through to December, and then the SOI. And just the highlights for me going through the papers in the half-year report. As Andrew said, they've got 2 primary objectives. The first is to optimise debt funding arrangements for councils, and on that ground, they're doing well. They issued 1.9 billion of bonds over the 6-month period, which apparently is a record, and they continue to offer very competitive funding rates to us. The second primary objective is around maintaining the quality of the debt book, which means ensuring that the councils that are lending the money or borrowing the money maintain their financial health, I guess, and there's no issues noted in that regard. So LGFA, as Andrew said, continue to hold a very high credit rating. In terms of the SOI, there's the letter of expectation that's in your pack from the Shareholders Council. They've raised a number of areas that they want to see focused on. The main ones that I picked out of there were around governance, so they're interested in succession planning and the expertise and diversity, etc., across the board and management. And I understand they have commissioned a piece of work to progress that. And the second area in particular for me was Three Waters, which we've talked about, and again that's noted in the SOI as a particular item of focus over the next period. So in terms of the actual draft SOI, the objectives, again Andrew's mentioned this, they remain consistent with the addition of the three waters. Their financial forecasts show that they expect to be sound and growing over the next 3 years, subject to what happens with Three Waters. So they're expecting to grow their loan book from 12.8 to 13.5 billion approximately, and their operating profit from 11 to 19 million approximately over the 3-year period. So forecasting is a continuation of good performance. So really take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Ian. So team, again, we're just looking at the item 8.2. There's the appendices attached there, 1, 2 and 3, which I'm sure you've all read. So any questions for the team? Otherwise, I'll look for someone to move the recommendation on page 16. Oh, hang on a sec. We've just got Councillor Halliday has a question.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just had a query on, and this will be more for our finance team, I think, on pages 56, 57, but it's in relation to our debt with the LGNZ, and, sorry, not LGNZ, well, you know who it is, but LGFA, thank you, Mark. But we're listed there as having basically long-term debt of $220 million, and as at 20th, as of December 2020. We're sort of under the impression that we have that net debt of about $165 odd million, and I was just wondering how this feeds back to that figure. It might be through the pre-funding that figure is lower. But
yeah, Councillor, that's exactly so. It's a net debt I think of 167 million and gross debt of 220, and it is around the pre-funding strategy and so forth. But if Ian wants to.
No, I mean, that's exactly right. So we have term deposits of the difference of whatever that is, 45 million-ish that floats, from month to month. But the net position, which is what really matters, is around that 170 million currently.
So I guess for other elected members, just remembering that the difference between the net debt and the gross debt is the pre-funding. It's ensuring that we have funds available on call for the projects as we need them, and also making advantage of those swap rates and so forth. So it's Councillor, not Councillor, maybe one day, Mark de Haast.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the benefit of members of the public and all the councillors. So in terms of this council has a treasury policy which allows pre-funding, which is effectively we have a debt book and we have loans that mature, and pre-funding is where you go to market and you actually refinance that early. So we take out borrowings in advance of our debt maturing, and we put that on term deposit. And in terms of the interest rates, what it costs us to borrow money from LGFA and what we can invest that for at the moment, and it's getting smaller and smaller as interest rates are going down, but we're able to make a little bit of profit. It basically, as the Chair said, it's all about liquidity. It's making sure that we have the funds in play to refinance our debt. It's one of the things that our independent credit rating agency, Standard & Poor's, actually rates us quite highly on. And the point of difference that we have with many other councils is that our pre-funding goes forward 18 months. So we can pre-fund debt that's maturing within 18 months. A lot of councils go for 12. And obviously there's a strategy behind that to make sure that we have liquidity, we also make sure that we don't have too much debt maturing in 1 year, because if we're all rushing off to LGFA at exactly the same time with large amounts of debt that are maturing, we actually are at the mercy of the market. So we can take best advantage, get the lowest interest rates for our ratepayers, and at the same time at the moment we're actually being able to make a little bit of money by pre-funding early. So just for the benefit, if there are people in the room that are not sure what pre-funding is, that's what it is. We borrow money early to refinance on time and to get the best interest rate that we can.
Thank you, Mark. And Councillor Halliday, thanks for asking the question, and good to see that you're getting a grasp of that and getting on track, because you sort of had the answer. I do want to add just finally to that, because it has been a bit topical. There's the comment that's been bandied around that we're the second most indebted council in the country. Given that our net debt and gross debt has been raised, our net debt currently sits at 8th, as shown by the Independent Ratepayers Report. So that's 8 out of the 70 councils in the country. But I do want to add some context to that. And as an example, we've talked about 3 waters today. Of that $167 million, $90 million of that has been spent in the last 10 years in our water infrastructure, and hence why we've got such a good response from the review around our 3 waters. So it is all relative in terms of the debt and where that has been spent or what it has been spent on. So Councillor Elliott, got a question from you.
Thank you, and look, I'm so sorry to put you guys on the spot again. We do want you to come back. Look, I'm just curious. You've just said that there are 9 staff, and I couldn't see in your financial forecast any costs of your buildings or your running costs unless they're under operating overheads. But I'm curious to know why you have 2 offices, one in Auckland and one in Wellington, that you're maintaining, especially considering after COVID lockdowns we've all learned a slightly different way to work. So I can't see the cost, but maybe you could just explain the benefits to you of having both offices.
Yep. Historically, we're only sort of 9 staff. So historically, we've had 2 offices. So the main office is in Wellington, and that's because of the importance of the relationships with various government entities such as OAG, DIA, SOLGAM, LGNZ, etc. But also we need to have sort of resilience, and particularly thinking with the earthquake risks. So in 2016 with the Kaikoura earthquake, we lost our office due to asbestos in the stairwell. So it's the fact that if there was a natural disaster, we need to have some, alternative place which to work. That said, all our IT is in the cloud, so we can work from home as well. So it's really just a sort of a resilience sort of issue. Maybe things are changing, because of the whole work from home now. So maybe we don't need that in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any further questions on the screen. I've got, I noticed earlier, I think His Worship the Mayor went to move and Councillor Holborough second. So if that still stands, moved by His Worship the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Holborough, open it up for discussion. There is none. So I'm going to...
I'm just waiting for a vote of introduction.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Holborough. Your Worship, sorry, just a little bit rusty having not chaired for a few weeks, so you're waiving your right for introduction. Councillor Holborough.
You didn't move. I just wanted to say thank you for coming along today, and particularly the depth of information you've given us around how that transition into those new water entities might or might not look, and also the commitment to climate change and those kind of things, and that will be reflected more in the reporting in future.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for your time today. It's been awesome.
Thanks for the feedback.
All right, so that I am being a bit more organised, any right of reply? No. Waived. Okay, so I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. That is carried. Ian and Andrew, thanks very much for your time today. And Andrew, thanks for coming along. And I do want to just make a comment in the sense that when we look back from the time that we decided to enter into the LGFA, you're starting to see the benefits of that now through the previous years and the forecasted years. So to Mark and the team as well, just well done for that work. So as I said, we rejigged the agenda a little bit just to make the best use of Andrew's time. And thanks, Andrew. So we're now moving on to item number 7.2 on the agenda, which is an update from Tony and his team from the Business Pop-Up School. So welcome up. And Jamie from the ED team. And looking at the time, team, I think what we'll do is have this update, and then if everyone is keen to, we'll break for a few minutes for a coffee and a toilet break, and then we'll kick back into it. Over to you guys. Third seat.
I think Ross is going to go before you. So. Yeah.
Startup weekend, can we have that one first, please? Thank you.
All right, so we're going to have the startup weekend first, and then Tony with the business pop-up school second. Yeah, over to you, Jane.
Morning all. So as part of the business support part of economic development team, we have been supporting for a couple of years two organisations who deliver business startup sessions. We have Ross from the Startup Weekend and Tony Henderson-Newport from PopUp Business School. Part of the way we support these events is that we provide some funding, but we also support them in actively being involved in them. We have counsellors who come along to a lot of the sessions, and we also help promote them through all of our marketing channels and source venues if needed, and if we can find suitable venues for them. So we've asked Ross and Tony to come along today to give some feedback on how the events went last year, which of course were slightly unusual in that we had to move them because of COVID, and there was probably quite a different type of person that came through those sessions compared to what may have come through previously. We are in the process at the moment of locking in dates and times and schedules for the next two sessions. So we've got Pop-Up Business School coming next June, and we're looking at September for Startup Weekend. So I will hand over to Ross to give a summary on Startup Weekend.
Good morning, Mr Mayor, Mr Chairperson and councillors. Thank you very much on behalf of Kapiti Startup Weekend for having us, giving us the opportunity to come back into the chambers. Last time we were here was 2 years ago, when we actually held the final of our event in the chamber here, and really want to thank the KCDC for your continued support. Specifically, some of the councillors actually participate in the event as mentors and judges in the past. So really appreciate the support. So what is Kapiti Startup Weekend? Startup Weekend is a 54-hour event where budding entrepreneurs come together to form a business, pitch an idea for a business that they've never worked on before, and then form teams around those businesses. Most of those people have never worked together before, and over the course of the weekend they validate and execute on a business and then pitch to a panel of judges. We asked our participants what being at a startup weekend was like. They described it as jumping in the deep end with a lifeguard. It seems daunting at first, but the mentors and volunteers make a really great learning experience regardless of your skills and backgrounds. We also heard from another participant that they weren't the same person after participating in the startup weekend. Most of these people that come and participate, I think that, I'll circle back to that. So Kapiti Startup Weekend has been running in Kapiti. This will be 2021 will be our 6th year. We have over 200 alumni. Last year we had 30 participants and 30 mentors. We regularly run a meetup, which is a bi-weekly opportunity for entrepreneurs throughout the Kapiti Coast to come together. That meetup group has over 300 members. Our email list is over 200 members. We are all about building community. The participants in Kapiti Startup Weekend gave us a 9.5 out of 10 for the quality of the event, and would mostly recommend us to their friends. So who attends? We attract participants from high school students to retirees. We welcome everybody from CEOs to students. It's a very inclusive and welcoming event where participants walk in and are equal and have equal rights in participating, and it's a very supportive and engaged event. So why do people attend? people attend because they want to learn about entrepreneurship and want to challenge the status quo. Most of the people who participate either have an idea or want to support an idea. It's a way for participants to engage with their entrepreneurial dreams. Most people don't have 6 months to a year to start a business, but they can spare a weekend to start a business. It is like going through a startup weekend is like going through the first year in business. It is a lot of these people are focused around high technology businesses or innovative businesses that have the ability to grow beyond a small business, and that's generally the focus. Although that doesn't necessarily exclude people who have focused on those. So one of the magical things of Startup Weekend is our mentors and crew. We're organised by volunteers, and we attract business leaders in their own right to come along and support budding entrepreneurs over the course of the weekend. They guide them and work with them through the journey from their initial pitch through to when they stand in front of a panel of judges and get their ideas critiqued by very renowned judges. So over the course of the weekend, on Friday night, they pitch an idea that they've never worked on before, and then form teams around these ideas that resonate. Like I said, most of these people have never been in the same room as these people, let alone worked alongside them. On Saturday, they work on customer validation because for those of you who are in business, or even for your CCTOs, making sure that you have customers for those entities is going to be the most important piece of your pie. Without those, you're going to fail. So these guys need to go out and talk to customers. They conduct video interviews, in-person interviews. They start building a minimum viable product. On Sunday, they pitched to a panel of judges. So last year we had, I think it's the next. So they pitched to a panel of judges. The judging criteria is around the validation, making sure that they get out and talk to customers. Are they actually solving a problem, and have you identified a specific target market? They also are judged on design execution. So how far have they taken their minimum viable product? How far have they gotten in a weekend? And you would be amazed at how far hungry entrepreneurs can take an idea over the course of 54 hours. And then the business model, is there fundamentals there for supporting the business model? So last year we had 3 judges. We had Marcel van den Assen, who is the immediate past president of the Angel Investors in New Zealand Association and Angel Investor of the Year. We also had Scott Houston, who's an entrepreneur and investor in his own right, and then also Councillor Buswell representing KCDC. And the winner was so it's judged, and the winners win in-kind support. The winner was a platform called Kiwi Content, which was looking at using AI and smart technologies to curate a New Zealand stock image market. That business is still, the founders, the 6 founders that worked on that business are still working on that currently. They're yet to go to market, but I know that they are continuing to work on that project, and that's them there. We also attracted, I know that my time's going to be up, but we also attracted national media. So we did a live interview on RNZ. We had articles on the New Zealand Herald. Our participants travelled from, last year we were the first startup weekend around the world to run in-person post-COVID. In the past, last year we attracted participants from as far away as Auckland. In the past, we have had participants from Christchurch, Auckland, and the furthest away we've had someone travel to Kapiti to partake in Kapiti Startup Weekend is the Philippines. So we have a really fantastic little event here on the Kapiti coast that supports entrepreneurs in building that community. So I'd really like to say thank you on behalf of those entrepreneurs that KCDC are in behind us, and look forward to bringing another successful event to Kapiti in 2021.
Look, thanks very much for that presentation, Ross, and for those in the room that have participated, Councillor Buswell, and I think I've seen Councillor Halliday there as well in some of the photos in the past. I'm just going to open it up for any questions of Ross. I see Councillor Holborough down. Just click your button there if your other councillors got questions, board members, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. So, Councillor Holborough.
Yeah, congratulations. This is an absolutely fantastic event. I'm just wanting to ask, it's been running for a few years now. Can you give examples of businesses that have gone through this weekend and then carried on to continue in business?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Holborough, for the great question. Typically, what we find is if you get a group of strangers together and pitch them to work on a business, they don't progress. But what we have got is we have a number of businesses that have taken flight since being involved with, so the entrepreneurs have taken the learnings from Startup Weekend and applied it to businesses. Notably, my own business is probably a fair example. I participated in a Startup Weekend in Wellington, and I don't think I would have been in business without participating in it. There are a number of business people in Kapiti, and I probably don't want to call them out, but that have participated in Startup Weekend and progressed. Globally, there are a number of international success stories. So the Startup Weekend model is run by volunteers like myself in, I think it was like 130 different cities around the world, and the alumni globally is massive, and there are significant success stories. But the big output for Kapiti for Startup Weekend in general is that education and empowerment of entrepreneurs, not necessarily businesses.
So it's what you learn from the process going forward.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Councillor Buswell, I should have just checked with you whether you wanted to add anything to that, because I know you've been quite an integral part of it. So.
Yeah, look, it's really amazing to go in on the Friday night and watch all the little newbies sitting there and perhaps not chatting to one another, and it's all new and exciting for them, and then to come in on the Sunday where the energy in the room is absolutely alive with people bouncing ideas and so excited about pitching their ideas, and you're right, I think it's about the learnings throughout that whole weekend that those people actually take on into the future, into all sorts of things that they delve into. I remember one of the participants actually got picked up by, I don't know, a company that make little capsules for premature babies. Other entrepreneurs around New Zealand look at these weekends and then go and handpick employees from them. So it's a really cool thing to be involved in, and I love it every year. And in fact, I wore my socks yesterday.
So we have a sock. One of the local businesses support us with Kapiti Startup Weekend socks. So if you guys want to come and participate, I'm more than happy to share a pair. But I would welcome any. Sorry.
Yes, I think I'll pass on sharing.
I would like to extend that invitation to all of the councillors to come along when we do run in September to see the energy that actually takes place over the weekend. Just even if you pop in for an hour, we have great food. The Councillor Halliday has been gracious in doing the food in the past couple of years, and hope he continues because he's fantastic. But I would welcome you all to come and see the energy that exists on the Kapiti Coast in the entrepreneurial space.
Yeah, you had me until you said Councillor Halliday did the food, and I was, I'm just kidding. Councillor McCann, and then Councillor Halliday.
Kia ora, great presentation, thank you. And I don't want to overstate what I'm picking on here. You mentioned that the focus is on entrepreneurs, not businesses, but how do you ensure that the lessons learned and the enthusiasm and all of that gets shared through to Kapiti businesses? What's the process and what channels do we use?
Sure, and great question. It is a challenge. I mean, we're a volunteer organisation, and making sure that those lessons do get shared with businesses and business people outside of the startup weekend can be quite a significant challenge. So every year we invite as many people as possible. We extend the invitation to the Chamber of Commerce, and they've been supportive in the past. But it's about making sure that the entrepreneurs that go through are mentored and supported. We also continue to run bi-weekly, a fortnightly catch-up, and also plug into wider connections. So we're supported by Creative HQ, which also provide a gateway for those entrepreneurs further on. Does that answer your question?
I think so, but is there a role for council to see if there is any way in which that enthusiasm and those skills can be shared through, whether it's lecture breakfasts or whether it's with KIDA or Chamber of Commerce, etc.?
Thanks for that question. One of the things that we're actually starting to work on at the moment is, and starting with a meeting next week with Chamber, is around how we actually support businesses. And we've spoken about it a number of times about how you have these startup events. How do you then support them through to the next stage, which is often the hardest part for businesses. So those discussions are happening. Where that will land, we're not sure yet.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Halliday?
I can actually more build on that a bit too, Rob. But look, first of all, I just want to endorse what Ross and the team do down at Startup Weekend. It's absolutely fantastic, and the energy, that's why I support it as much as I do. I think as a way for someone to get a business or an idea moving, it's absolutely fantastic. But also, I think this is the sort of unrealised aspect of all this, which is, I think, is actually its biggest selling point, is the fact that you can learn so much skills there. You know, just getting involved with it and being there. A lot of people think they can't contribute, and it's actually amazing the things that people can contribute that they don't even realise. I did drop a handout from KIDA pre-meeting, and there's a relationship that KIDA has and always has. In fact, to be honest, KIDA started out of the Startup Weekend, interestingly enough, and it was around that ongoing support to business. And as we know, KIDA's been involved in the ED strategy, but they've just set up base down at Kapiti Airport. And that's part of that. What KIDA wants to be is part of that process of ongoing support for people that participate in things like Startup Weekend and participate in PopUp, but having that structure there in place all year round and easily accessible as well. And that's where that's moving forward in that space. So hopefully, Jamie, there might be some synergies there with you having a chat with KIDA in that space in partnership with Chamber, because I think it's important that we're all working together in this space.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to wind it up there. Ross, thank you for your time coming along, and we're just going to hand it over to Tony because I'm mindful of time, so it's not putting pressure on you, Tony. If you just...
Hopefully, Mr Chair, a number of the questions are similar. So we're just bringing up... so for those who don't know, PopUp Business School is now the Rebel Business School and rebranded over the last few months to better reflect the attitude of people who take risks to start a business. So to all the rebels in Kapiti Coast, we have a big thank you. I just wanted to start the presentation. So this slide deck I'm going to run through in a minute, but when we did our first event here in Kapiti, has anybody here actually been to Pasos? So only a few? Everybody know about Pasos? So Michelle was one of our first graduates in our first event way back in 2018, and he had a vision and a dream of owning the best Sicilian Italian restaurant in the Kapiti Coast. And for those who have been for dinner there, I think that you will relate to the fact that it is a real relevant part of the Kapiti Coast story. The interesting thing for us is that people who come to the Rebel Business School, as it is now, often have been in business before, have no idea what they want to do, or they have a business dream or a vision or an idea. And so our opportunity is over 10 days and 20 workshops, a trade show and a celebration event to give them that confidence and capability to bring their passion to life alongside practicality and actually make things work. So just after this presentation, just before the questions, I want to finish with another story of a local business that came out of the Rebel Business School on our first event. So this is some of the stats that we gather and catch, and I can't even see the mouse. So I don't know how I'm going to move this thing down.
If you come around this side, you might be better.
I can just see it now, but I need the scroll bar. Technology. You guys can still see me, eh? Because I'm standing up. Guys, can you hear me all right? Yep. Sweet. So you can indeed. So we had an event overview. So 45 people attended, and there were active attendees of 3 days or more. There were 47 show-ups. So an active attendee is somebody who stays for 3 days or more out of the whole 10 days. And our stats are that they stay for 8.9 out of the 10 days, which is, I think you'll agree, is pretty good. And this is our last event that we ran in 2020 here in Kapiti. Just come down a bit. I want to go that way. Thank you. Actually, worth just touching on progress. So 64% of the attendees made sales during the 10 days. Because the intent is actually how do you get started in 10 days? Not just thinking about it or talking about it. If you want to do that, you're most probably in the wrong course. And 19% actually started their businesses and 31% were almost ready. And you can see from, oh, here we go, perfect. So where do people come from? And you can see a raft of attendees from up and down the coast. So gathering that data is important as we go forward. But who came to the event? So interestingly, you can see here, 77% were women. And that is, we average, I think, about across the whole country, 72%. A really good mix of ethnicity. But it also is related to the demographic, which is in this particular area. Same with age. And a nice big block here in the seniorpreneur sector. Again, I think evident government benefit, so 26% were on benefits, but also we look at who is carrying some form of disability so that we can support them. In that one event, I can tell you that we had one person with cerebral palsy and another one who was profoundly deaf, and yet they have that entrepreneurial talent as well. So how do we foster and support that in the Kapiti Coast? People heard about us, and through Facebook, through the Kapiti Coast District Council, a really good bunch of attendees that were learning about it through the comms team here. Attendance, we talked about the average per day, but we also track what's happening on each day. So our HIP days are web days, which are on the Wednesdays when people build websites, and you'd be surprised how many people publish a website and then deal with it afterwards. Employment status. So you can see here of the people who came, 51% have run a business before, which is a really high stat for any of the regions where we run. 23% were unemployed, 36% were self-employed. So it's really interesting when you start to gather the data, what it all means for the Kapiti Coast. These are the stats on the sales, and we're just adding in another stat, which is the sales that are made on the trade show, because that's generally significant, and it's a big confidence boost. What's interesting, though, is you can see here all of the manufacturing businesses, administration and support services, arts and crafts, rental. So interesting, scientific, professional. There's a raft of businesses, so it's almost easy to say, oh, are they craft businesses, or to shoebox them into some kind of pattern. But the raft of businesses are quite broad. And I can tell you we've had some really interesting ones. We also measure the change in people's motivation, their confidence, their happiness over the 10 days. What happens to their business skills and their self-efficacy is your belief in your own capability that you can complete the task, which in this case is bringing a business to life. There are a number of websites that are built. So these stats here show that some businesses publish before website, some are improved during. These were launched during the website, and these ones are nearly ready. And that's really interesting because that happens during the 10 days as well. And then there's the links to the wider ecosystem and what does that look like. These are local business owners from the Kapiti Coast who have volunteered their time to come in and to be our 11 o'clock speakers. There is nothing like an origin story that really excites and motivates various business owners and entrepreneurs to lift their game. Because if they can see that somebody else started on a kitchen table, then so can they. And then economic development, we always run a little segment on what's happening in Kapiti Coast and why is it important that businesses grow here. But importantly, it's not about that so much as it is about sustainable businesses. And so all of our graduates here, we have 163 attendees so far. We're due back in June. And I'm hopeful that we will go over 200 small businesses that have been to the Rebel Business School here in Kapiti. We always gather feedback. Some of the light bulb opens, but messages for our partners, which is, significant for you guys. The biggest thank you, it has been totally incredible, and I might say life-changing for me and my family, as I can't telling them about it. We always say don't rush in, same for the startup weekend, I'm sure. Afterwards, don't just go and change everything in your life because you're so excited. Just take a breath. And these are some of the photos that have been on the event. This one here, which I'll only run for a sec, and would normally have sound but doesn't in this scenario.
What do people say about the PopUp Business School Trade Show?
Amazing, so invigorating. I feel pumped up and really motivated.
So it's been fantastic. And the PopUp School, I recommend it to anybody.
It's absolutely awesome. So much really good information.
Potentially got my first customer. Hi guys, I'm Jules. We're doing the trade show. Started from scratch with nothing and just gave it a go. This is amazing, and I've made a few sales today already.
Great way to meet people and to get your business brand out.
Absolutely amazing. Being pushed out of my comfort zone.
Pause it. But you can see that, and this is our young lady that was deaf. So it was. I've done a few sessions separately with an interpreter to support her business growth as well. But you can see from the imagery that there's an amazing amount of stuff that goes on in 10 days. And besides acknowledging the team here, like Darren has been with us since the very first event that we ever ran in New Zealand. All three here. Jamie is a project manager who works with our project manager to make the event real. But I'm just grateful for our team who are just so passionate about changing the lives of ordinary New Zealanders. And so that gives you an overview of the data that we collect here in Kapiti. But I also want to say we have all of that data from the previous two events as well. And just before I open the floor to questions, that last story. So in our first event, we had two young ladies, Kayla and Heather. Heather was Posy Blooms, who's running out of Kapiti, Raumati, and Kayla is KC Beauty. And what they did is that they got together and collaborated and jointly leased a premises in Raumati where they run both of their businesses from. And the point around all of that is that was not necessarily a vision 3 years ago, but the growth of their businesses and the contribution that they make to economic growth here in Kapiti is significant. And I just want to acknowledge the council and also the economic development team, because none of this would be possible without the key support that you have. Mayor Guru has been at every event, Angela Buswell has been, and I look around the room and I recognise some amazing people that are in the room that have contributed to this event. And we're back in June for our fourth event here, and I'm really keen to work with our economic development team to measure and strategise from those businesses that have already created and where they are now. What are the things that have made a difference in their growth? And I should mention that we have our alumni program, which Azu on our team runs, and she runs that for the whole country. But I know that we have ambassadors around the country, and Kapiti is one of those. So we run weekly webinars for our graduates, and also we're looking for hotspots and top tips. And we bring people in from overseas to also speak on those webinars every week as well. So it is about continuing a sustainable growth journey for those small businesses. It's not just a one shot, it's 2 weeks, and then it's what happens after that. Any questions?
Thank you, Tony. And look, just watching the presentation, I noticed, and I can't remember his name, but the beard thing
Graham.
at the Otaki Yard when they opened.
Yeah.
So it's good to pick up and recognise places that have been through the Rebel Business School and seeing them out there in the community. So just going to move to questions. Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Tony. 2 questions. Cost to attend and waiting list.
So it's free to attend.
And I guess the question's for you too.
Yeah, so it's free to attend.
Yeah.
The cost for the event is partnered between the Ministry of Social Development, Kapiti Coast District Council, and Wellington NZ. And so the fact that people can come for free means that quite often the people who might not otherwise get a chance, the tradies, the hairdressers, the florists, the beards, they have a vision and a dream, but that's that capability.
Before I move to any other questions, although there's none on the screen, I think it is probably important to acknowledge the contribution given that Mr. Mansell's here from Coastlands as well. So I wouldn't typically have the opportunity, but given it now, just to acknowledge that contribution from Coastlands to make that space available. Councillor Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Buswell.
Sorry, could you answer the same question? And do you have waiting lists was the other part of it?
So we do charge for our event. Tickets, we offer prices have fluctuated and changed depending on years. Last year we offered a discount due to post-COVID. In the past we've offered free, we've given away free tickets, but because the startup weekend is such an intense event, we found that people need to have some skin in the game to be really immersed in it. Typically tickets are less than $100, but for that $100 they get all the mentorship throughout the weekend, 7 meals, all the internet and all the support, and actually it's cheaper than going out for a meal. So and we don't typically have a wait list. We have to actively promote our event to attract participants. It's a little bit different for startup weekends, which are in regional in cities where they have a significant capture of the young demographic that are in that space. So we actually have to market pretty hard to attract participants. And I'd like to thank the support of the ED team because they do get our message out through their channels as well.
And we don't have a wait list either. So.
Councillor Buswell.
Once again, it's always really fun to be involved in the PopUp or the now Rebel Business School. And I think what was interesting this last year was it was directly after COVID. So people had quite a different mind shift, and people had lost their jobs, and people had really changed what they thought our world was going to be going forward. And so it was really interesting to see those people really step up and be confident in what they were doing and where they were going, and just trialing different things. And also it is really super inclusive, so you have a huge diversity of people. You have beneficiaries working alongside people that have startup business already that just need that extra boost and that extra confidence to get out there and really push their companies. And there are so many businesses now on the Kapiti Coast that are flourishing, and also in the Horowhenua, simply because they've attended the PopUp Business School and they've got the confidence to take their business to the next level, and there's that ongoing support for them, which is really lovely to see. It's quite heartening. So thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
And it's always good to be involved in it.
I don't see any further questions on the screen. Just a comment from myself. I'm chair of Elevate Otaki, and one thing that we've been talking about, and Maria is also our support person there, is around potentially working with the Rebel Business School. We've got a number of empty shops there in Otaki as well, and a willing landlord to be generous and supporting as well. So, we'll maybe have that conversation sometime soon.
Yeah, sure.
Just going to hand it over to Jamie, who just wants to wind it up.
Just a couple of quick comments from me. Thank you for those, Ross and Tony. The Rebel Business School and the Startup Weekend are both very different events for different types of business people. There is definitely space in Kapiti for both of them, as well as the other events that are delivered, such as the Kickstart through KEDA. I'm really looking forward to moving forward and talking with all of those organisations and finding out the best ways forward to support the business owners or potential business owners that we have here in Kapiti, because the breadth of experience is so vast that it's very difficult to come up with one single solution for all of them. So there is definitely space for different types of models. So thank you.
All right. So look, I just want to say thanks to Tony and Ross for making the time to come along and show us the amazing work that you're doing. Also just noting the work put in by the ED team from Darren, Jamie, Leanna and so forth. So again, that's reflected today by the comments that we've heard around the table. So I do want to acknowledge the effort put in by the team as well. I'm just checking that's just an update. There's no motion or anything there. So with that, just thanks guys for coming along. We're going to stop for 10 minutes. I'm looking at the time we've got. Thanks guys. We've got still a reasonable part of the agenda to get through. So if we can be back at 10 past 11, and it would be good to try and wrap up by sort of 12:30 because we've got quite a bit to get through and we've got another council meeting at 1:30. So 10 past 11, team.